Plan. All right, guys, we are live, and I am here with, a man of many talents, producer, writer, director, Brian Yuzna. How you doing, man?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. It's such a pleasure to have you on and talk with you because, as I was saying backstage, first of all, 40th anniversary of Reanimator. How's it feel 40 years later with this film still being one of probably one of the greatest horror comedies, in my opinion, and many people's opinions.
It's really gratifying. It was the first movie that I made, professional movie, and I came out to Hollywood to do that. Drug my kids out, and I really gambled a lot. I put up all my money and borrowed money, and I just thought it was real special while we were doing it. And from the time we first showed it, it just worked. Of course, in most largest part to Stuart Gordon's ability as a director, as a storyteller.
Yeah. And unbelievable director. He was unreal.
But I think it's really, it was always popular. But it was hard, it would have been hard back then to imagine 40 years. I never thought I would be this old, but times change, and a lot of movies don't hold up. Some movies that are real popular don't hold up. Some that I like a lot, I'll go back and see them from ages ago, and they don't deliver anymore somehow.
Yeah,
and
that happens. That happens.
Still does.
They
had a little bit of a theatrical release a month or two ago, and
I heard that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you're not going to get a ton of people coming to the movies, but my daughter had a bunch of her friends. It was her birthday, and so she took a whole bunch of people there.
Oh, that's great.
And it was, and I bet over half of them weren't horror fans, I'd never seen it.
So they had no idea what they're getting into.
And they liked it.
That says a lot about it.
I think the times have changed. I think when it first came out, it was like super gory.
Oh, yeah.
But we've gone so far from that I think even for just regular audiences that aren't horror audiences, or gore hounds or something, they don't. It's still bloody, but it's not. That isn't the main thing. That's
exactly.
But it's still edgy. It's still, it still crosses the line. It's just a good movie, and that's really great.
I think a lot of things you said there are true, and I think the gore, when it comes to the effects work there, it was the 80s, and a lot of those effects hold up so well. I'm a big advocate for practical effects. The Thing by Carpenter is my favorite film of all time. I think that's some of the greatest effects work of all time. And so I always want to see practical in films over CGI, unless it's necessary. It's done well, of course.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm a big effects guy. I wouldn't say, I think the effects that we got on Reanimator were the effects we could afford. But they were, and they're all practical, of course. But I don't think they're all that great, but they work within the movie, and the movie has a kind of suspension of disbelief, which every movie has to at one point or another.
Oh, yeah. And the comedy, I think, is what also makes people love it that aren't big into the gore, because it originally started out, and we'll get to that, as a straight horror film. Then it kind of evolved into having this, this comedic take injected into it. And I really think that was one of the best decisions, because there was no movie really like that. And there's still to today, maybe Evil Dead 2 and Reanimator are the two films I put up for horror comedies. Best horror comedies.
Which ones?
Reanimator and Evil Dead 2.
Well, I would say Return of the Living Dead is right up there.
That's not, you know, I've never been a big fan of that movie. I
Oh,
know it's
well,
blasphemous, but I've never been a big fan of it. And I know you directed 3,
the
Return of the
third
Living Dead
one, yeah.
3.
Yeah, I thought that Return of the Living Dead is really a good movie. It's
Hey, Joel.
I think it was the movie that showed us how to make EC comics in the movies. If you think about it,
Oh yeah.
you know, before that, when people did comic book movies, they kind of would do it like Creepshow even had a comic book and had frames, and Batman, they did Pow and Yow, and
Yeah, the
they
special,
tried
you know,
to
the
make it
noises.
seem like it was on paper with 3-color printing,
Yeah.
you know, and that somehow that was what made a comic book fun. But I think with Return of the Living Dead, Dan did EC Comics, which are like the original Tales
Yeah,
from the
Tales from the
Crypt
Crypt.
comics and
Great.
everything. And they had crazy stuff like brain eating. It's all, you know, really extreme.
Yeah.
And I think he achieved that. And I think without Return of the Living Dead, we wouldn't have, you know, I don't think Joel Silver would have had a clue as how to do the Tales from the Crypt TV show. But after that,
Oh, I can see the influence, absolutely,
yeah.
because I was a big fan of the show.
I mean, you can
Yep.
see it also you can see it in comics in general, the evolution of adapting comics to film. With
Yeah.
the superhero movies or cartoon comic books, I think they didn't quite hit their stride until CGI was truly developed, because the kind of stuff in superhero movies
Yeah, it
are
makes sense.
always
Yeah,
flying around and stuff, you know. And you know, I
yeah,
remember
they
the early,
that genre benefited hugely
I
from
mean, I know it's been overdone and everything, and I
yeah.
certainly I don't go to them anymore. But I
Yeah, I've
do
never been a
think
fan of those.
that before they did CGI, they just couldn't be as fantastic as the Marvel comics were.
Yeah.
And once they had CGI, those superhero movies seemed to just use CGI. With horror, I don't believe that. I think horror, the practical, the puppets,
Absolutely.
I think there's something less, you know, something about CGI kind of goes more for fantasy. And, you know, with horror, I don't know, with the straight horror, The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, you
Yeah.
kind of don't want to be aware of fantasy elements.
Mhm.
It takes away from the, you know, I
The
think
the
the fear of
tension,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
the tension, the fear, absolutely.
Now, even in The Shining, or, you know, the Legend of Hell House, or, you know,
Great
I
movie.
mean, it's, you know, horror kind of works kind of in a different way, I think. So I don't think horror really gets can take advantage of CGI. You know, I think the puppetry is much more real. You know, and
Yeah,
that's what the thing is. It's just, yeah,
absolutely.
it was the cutting edge of replacement puppetry, where you would have
Yeah.
something do one thing and then cut another angle, and they would start the puppet from there and go a little further, cut
Unbelievable
from another
how
angle.
they did that. Rob
Yeah.
Bottin, I mean, he was treated for exhaustion, I think, multiple times making that movie. He never stopped working.
Yeah,
But
I
I mean,
watched
yeah,
it. I once got the Blu-ray, or yeah, I think it was a Blu-ray, and they had they had you could run another track where they had storyboards of the special effects.
okay, so
While
you
you're
see it live.
watching it, they would have the storyboards, and you could clip to them shooting the special effects and talking about it. And
That's really cool.
evidently, you know, Dan, you know, they, you know, there was a lot of stress around the effects, because generally in movies, effects don't work. And the reason
Yeah,
they don't is that they're special effects. You're inventing something. So you can, if there was something that always worked, it wouldn't be called a special effect. It would
Yeah.
just be, this is
facts.
the movie.
Yeah.
But and so there's often a lot of tension between the movie makers, normally the director, but can also be the producer, about, you know, the effects not working.
Yeah.
But
Well, you hear that a lot about movies, effects being cut all the time from movies because it didn't work for whatever reason. So absolutely.
But I think you know, I like the practical puppets and stuff, because I always feel like you just got, if it's not working, you just want to kind of get some smoke and blinking lights and some goop and just keep moving around, just finding something that works.
And it's something that the actors, especially, and it's there, it's on set, it's right in front of them that they can react to.
Yeah. Well, special effects artists are in the actors union. They're performing.
Oh, okay.
It's just like performing in makeup, or, you know, you can be performing in just regular glamour makeup, or you can perform with a mask on, or with latex appliances like Freddie. You can be a guy in a suit. You're a special effect, or something like Society, the shunting in Society.
We got to talk about
probably the biggest guy in a suit you ever saw. That's a big plastic suit. It's just that there's 12 people in it.
Underneath it.
To make it
I think you, George, all you guys pushing up on it.
That's really a guy in a suit kind of monster movie.
Yeah, no, that we'll get to that. I wanted to just see what made you get into producing. Like, what made you? Were you always a horror fan, a movie fan, and then what led to you finally, you know, discovering Reanimator, and
I
getting involved with that?
Yeah, I never grew. I didn't grow up in anywhere where the entertainment business was somehow a option. It just didn't, you know, I watched TV. I went to the movies like a madman.
Yeah.
But at one point, I never studied film. I never never took a class. But I did end up with a Bolex movie camera in the 70s when the news departments of TV stations were dumping the Bolexes. They used to do everything on location with a 16 millimeter Bolex wind up that had 3 lenses.
Oh, okay.
A 16 millimeter. And then they'd have to rush it to the studio and get it developed and to get it on the air. Well, when videotape went portable, you know, videotape used to be 2-inch and these huge cameras that they had, big monsters. When they got to handheld video cameras that were had enough resolution, well, then everybody bought the video cameras because they didn't have to develop it, and you could cut it so easy. You just get the footage and put it in the editing system and chop it up and put it on the news. So they got rid of the 16 millimeters. I ended up with one.
Okay. And so when they were dumping them all off, new technologies coming in, so you picked some up.
And at that time I lived out in the country, and I had a herd of goats, and I had turkeys and, you know, crazy stuff. And so I got some film, and I did photography. I had a black room, dark room, and, you know, so I was into photography, but I got this camera and I started shooting like my goats in black and white. And then I had a projector, and I'd sit in my living room and watch it after I'd got it developed. Okay. And I'd go, wow, this looks like Bergman, you know. I started because I was a big movie fan.
See, that answered the question.
I just got into it, and I said, God, I'm going to try to make a movie. And I found somebody had gone to the film school in Chapel Hill, which was the town outside of which I lived, and we made a short film. And I thought it was just wonderful. I was just totally taken. I just loved the whole process. It was so great. and I loved the movie. Once I got it all done, I put it on VHS and I
Yeah.
played it for my friends. And I thought it was just great until I watched it with someone else.
Yeah.
And when I watched it with someone else, now I'm seeing it through their eyes, and I'm going, "Oh no, this isn't any good.
You're starting to
This
self-guess
is
and
bad."
self-conscious. Yeah.
I didn't know, right? Because I
Mhm.
only saw through my own
Yeah,
eyes.
your vision of it
Yeah.
and what you put
And
out.
so then and by that time I had started reading, Box Office Magazine and Weekly Variety, and started reading up on movie making and business. And and then I thought, man, I would like to do this. I had a lot of different businesses. I had an art supply store. I had was a partner in kind of a big beer hall that had live acts, sandwich shop. I was a carpenter. I built houses, anything to make
Yeah,
money.
so you
And
did
so
you were
then I
doing
said,
everything.
wow, this is more fun than anything I've done. I want to make a movie. So then I turned my attention and I thought, but it's going to be I want to make a professional movie. I want to make a Hollywood movie. I want to make a movie like the Roger Corman Poe movies, which I grew up with, The Pit and the Pendulum,
Hitting the
and the
pendulum.
William Castle House on Haunted Hill, The Tingler. These are things that the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. These were the kind of horror movies I grew up with, the Hammer films. So I wanted to do something like that, and so I came out to LA, and I put an ad in Variety actually that said horror movie director wanted. This was before fax machines.
Yeah.
And I got hundreds of letters. And so I'd go out to LA, and I'd go up to New York and out to LA. About probably 3/4 of them were from LA, and a quarter, maybe 20% from New York. And so I'd go out and just meet people. And I still know some of them, and just set up meetings. And then I eventually found someone who kind of took me around to movie sets and introduced me to people, and he had gone to USC with John Carpenter and all those people.
Oh, wow.
And so he kind of told me the lay of the land. And then I started getting money together to make a movie and looking for the right project. And this guy told me to go out to Chicago to meet Stuart Gordon. And I went out there, and he was a theater director, and we got along real well.
Now, what year was this around when you met Stuart?
Well, I met Stuart in '83.
Okay, so a year or so before you filmed Reanimator.
Well, I met him. It's very nicely bookended. I met him over Thanksgiving weekend in 1983.
Okay.
And then that's when he showed me he had a pilot script for a TV show based on Reanimator, of the stories.
Mm-hmm.
And then I liked him a lot, and I totally trusted him because I saw his plays. And so I said, well, if you want to develop it into a feature, then I want to make it. And so that's what we started doing with Dennis Paoli.
Such a great.
We started working.
Dennis is a very integral part to all of you guys' work. I mean, Stuart Gordon, yourself, the bands, Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton, Dennis Paoli. He doesn't get mentioned as much as he should, because
writers normally don't.
I know, which is unfortunate.
No, writers and producers don't. It's the director and the actors that get and then it's special effects people in the horror movie genre.
Yeah.
Special effects people get a lot of stuff. But anyway, we developed it, and then over the Thanksgiving weekend, 1 year later, Stuart had Thanksgiving at my house, and that Monday we started shooting Reanimator, and we finished it by Christmas.
Oh, that's coming full circle.
Say hi to her.
Yeah, Portia in the chat.
That's Bobby Easley's movie.
Yeah, she says in the chat, "Hi, Brian, leading lady from HP
Yeah,
Lovecraft."
I'm a partner in a little distribution company called Dark Arts, and we distribute that movie.
Was that the one that also distributed Dagon, or is that another one of
No,
Dagon?
no, no.
Okay,
Dagon is Lionsgate.
okay, because that's an
But
I
it
love
was
that. I
made.
love
It was made by Filmax in Spain. They financed it. I
film.
produced
That's the
it.
name.
I actually got Dennis to write the script to Dagon
Yep.
immediately after it was during, yeah, just right after Reanimator.
Okay, so for
And then we had
before
the
Dolls.
script when we were shooting. No, yeah, well, I think I got him to start it before Dolls,
Okay.
but I remember we did have the script while we were shooting From Beyond.
Yeah.
And at one point we were going to shoot it in Wales. I had financing to shoot it in Wales, but then it didn't get made forever until I went to Spain to make The Fantastic Factory, and so I had that script in my pocket, and I needed projects when I started The Fantastic Factory.
Yeah.
And so
And
that's
where
then
the
we
film
made it in
came out.
Spain, because now the movies were being financed by Spain, by this company Filmax in Spain, and it was a label that I had called The Fantastic Factory, and so we worked with Spanish subsidies, which meant we had to have European content. You can't have a bunch of Americans and still get the subsidies.
Yeah, I always figured that.
And then we did location scouting and chose the town of Combadro in Galicia, which was a really cool look for it.
Yeah.
And
I love that movie. I feel that that's such an underrated Stuart Gordon film, an underrated horror film in general. Not a lot of people I talk to, unless they're big Stuart Gordon fans or big genre fans, know or have seen Dagon.
Well, I think the reason is that all the Fantastic Factory movies that I made, 9 of them.
Yeah, they were all directed.
Well, what happened is we pre-sold them to Lionsgate. Well, then Lionsgate I think they just gave it to Sci-Fi Channel, did a deal with Sci-Fi Channel, got their money back, and then didn't do anything with it.
That sucks.
It's just like Lionsgate. I made Return of the Living Dead 3 and The Dentist 1 and 2.
I love those
films. For Trimark. But Trimark was bought by Lionsgate.
Okay.
And then I made Bride of Reanimator, we sold to Live Entertainment, and then Live financed. Then I made 2 Silent Night, Deadly Night movies for Live. Well, then Live ended up becoming part of Lionsgate. So Lionsgate ended up with all these movies.
I was just going to say, they own the rights to all of them still?
They have the ones, something like Return of the Living Dead 3, the things that were made by Trimark and Live, they would own because the company owned it.
Yeah.
Something like Bride of Reanimator, I own that. Yeah. But once they have the distribution rights, you don't have to own the movie if you got the distribution rights. Nobody else can do it.
Yeah.
And with the Fantastic Factory, they bought the distribution rights. They get the rights for like 25 years, right?
Wow.
In their deal. And so they kind of just make or don't make their money, and then that's it. And it was only recently that they tried to push Return of the Living Dead 3 or The Dentist. They had this best one label,
like the physical releases and everything.
Yeah, but see, the thing is that that's not their business. What they were trying to do is make the next Hunger Games. Yeah, their business isn't, just like From Beyond is owned by MGM. Mm-hmm. Well, if I owned From Beyond, I'd have the new 4K this year. I'd have tons of extras. I do the whole thing because there's an audience out there for it.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
for a company like MGM, they're
Yeah, I
not in
know.
the business
They're
of
dropping the bucket for
turning
that.
library films. What those
Yeah.
movies are to them is kind of real estate. It's assets that they borrow that they get their line of credit against. If you look up in the Library of Congress website, you can look up any movie and see all the notices on it. It'll show who has the copyright, and
Yeah.
it'll show whenever it has a lien against it. And you'll
Yeah.
see that MGM, like when I looked up From Beyond, it said From Beyond and 3,253 other titles as a lien against a Citibank line of credit.
It's crazy
So that's why
how
you
the
don't
politics
see
behind the scenes work like
if
that.
you've got somebody like Bill Lustig with his Maniac Cop series, well, he owns those things, so he can keep putting them out whenever he wants. I own Reanimators. I can do whatever I want with it. I own Society. But once you license the distribution, well, then you don't, you can't do it.
Yeah, you don't really
And
truly own your movie.
Most people that make movies don't own them. They can't touch it. They can't.
Yeah.
They can't do anything with it. And when the movie isn't on the shelf, it's lost.
Yep.
Nobody can see it, like you said, Dagon. Or for me, for example, I wish I owned Necronomicon. I know that
was another one. Yeah, that's another one you did.
Would just get an audience, but nobody's seen it.
I've seen it years ago, but there are some people who like that movie. I mean, people in the chat, if you're a Necronomicon fan, let us know.
If they could see it, there'd be a shitload of people that would like that movie.
Oh yeah, no,
I'm not saying it's a great movie. I'm just saying there's what's not to like, man.
Oh yeah,
Jeffrey Combs is H.P. Lovecraft as almost an action hero.
He's so good.
I mean, this is. I mean, it's a trilogy. So that, of course, most movie makers love to make trilogies. Multiple. Episodic movies, but audiences don't like them.
Harakat, my boy Larry said, saw it on Necronomicon on rental back in the day. The cover grabbed me immediately. Speaking of covers, Larry, The Dentist 2. When I went to Blockbuster as a kid in the early 90s or so, the cover of The Dentist 2 always freaked me out back then. With the razor blades coming out of her mouth.
Oh, the number 2.
Love it. Yeah, love that cover. That is such a great cover. Same with all the covers. And that's something I wanted to talk about. Obviously, you got close with Stuart Gordon, as we know. You got close with Charles Band, Richard Band with Empire. You produced Reanimator, From Beyond, Dolls with them. So many things.
No, I didn't produce Reanimator for them. I paid for Reanimator.
No, yeah, you started the whole thing.
Straight. Yes, Empire. I unfortunately gave the distribution rights to Empire. I loved what they were doing.
Yeah.
But then they never paid. So then I had to go to court.
Yeah.
But they paid to make From Beyond and Dolls were the other 2 movies. And then I was working on RoboJocks, but I didn't. But then I moved on. And Stuart stayed doing it with them. But I think that stuff like From Beyond and Dolls is a good movie.
Dolls is my favorite killer Dolls film. I just did a review. I do long 30, 40, 50-minute deep dive reviews, like very long. I go into every little thing. But Dolls, I just did recently. I love that film so much. It's so whimsical. Like there's just like such it has so much heart to it.
Yeah, it's a fairy tale.
Yeah. And Guy Ralph was in it. I know he did a lot of some of the Puppet Master films and a lot of other stuff.
After Dolls was the one that made him the Puppet Master.
Yep.
But he also, Stuart and I went to London to cast for Dolls, and when we saw him, we went, "Wow, that's Mr. Sardonicus."
Yeah,
we had.
Yeah, I mean, the casting.
That's the William Castle movie, by the way.
I wasn't. I knew it sounded familiar, but I don't think I've seen that one actually.
Yeah. Well, it's about a guy
Check
who
that out.
who I don't know, what is he, steals the coins off the eyes of a dead person or some woman,
Oh,
and
okay. That sounds
and
familiar.
is somehow cursed, and he's have you ever seen the movie The Man Who Laughs with the
Oh, the
big
grin. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That
yeah.
that I know. I've seen.
Well, his mouth is stuck, and so he can only eat by, and he
Oh, okay.
tortures women with leeches, and it's
When you
pretty.
what?
But you know, as every William Castle movie,
Yeah.
there's always a sequence at the end that's genuinely kind of scary and cool. You know,
Oh,
if you
yeah.
think of the Tingler, it's when finally they they kill the guy by making him so scared he can't scream. The Tingler did, but there's a whole you know the deaf and the dumb woman, deaf and dumb woman can't scream. And the gimmick in the Tingler is that if you get scared, there's this microscopic kind of caterpillar in the base of your spine that starts growing up your spine as you get
That's
more and more
right. I
scared.
remember
And
that.
if
That
you don't,
is
and
so
if you
weird.
scream, it shrinks back down.
Yeah, that's such a
And if
weird
you don't
original idea.
scream, it's going to choke you. So then the gimmick was they put little air blowers in the seats, every 10 or 20 of them, so that when the Tinglers come out, they blow it up and say, "Scream, scream, it's loose in the theater." It was Vincent Price.
Yeah.
Remember, the
I
Tingler was
gotta
the first
I gotta
movie
rewatch
that
that
had
movie.
the Tingler was the first movie that had an LSD trip in it.
Really? I did
Yeah,
not know that. I
Vincent
gotta rewatch
Price takes acid in the movie and has a trip.
that. Like an action, so it's the first to simulate an LSD trip in film.
Well, I mean, this was in the
This is what,
50s,
50
where
something?
it
Yeah.
wasn't like really. It was something that very few people knew about.
Yeah, till like the 60s, late 60s, mid 60s, I would say.
Yeah.
But so before we get on to directing, when you made the move to that for Society, which is one insane movie, I love it so much. That is such a favorite of mine. You and Stuart Gordon, and I always forget this until I read up a bit, and it reminded me. You guys came up with the original story for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids
Oh
and
yeah.
brought that to Disney.
We were producing it. He was
Yeah.
directing. I'd moved my family down to Mexico City where we shot it,
Mhm.
and but Stewart, unfortunately, right before shooting, we built all the huge grass and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
right before shooting, Stewart had a health problem and had to drop
Oh,
out.
that's right. Okay. Yeah.
And then once he dropped out, then Joe Johnston came to direct it, and he brought his own producer, and
Yeah. So
so
you left.
we Stewart and I stood on the sidelines. But the script was Ed Naha had written Dolls, and
Okay.
so
Yeah.
Stewart and I worked up the pitch, and we went to Disney with it, and they bought
Yeah.
it, and we had called it Teeny Weenies. But Jeffrey
That's right.
Katzenberg told us that it wouldn't. That he said, "Look, at guys, we're going to have to change the title. Teeny Weeny sounds like a low-budget porn movie."
I mean, they might have been onto something. It does a little bit.
Well, it is silly, but hey, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is a great title, especially because the
Yeah.
movie worked.
Oh,
But
yeah.
and then once the new, once Joe Johnston took over, they delayed the movie, right?
Mhm.
Because we were ready to shoot, and then they did. And then he had someone do another pass, and they added. I think what they added was good. The stuff. What they did is they did that kind of the kind of Back to the Future opening with
Mhm.
the inventions. Remember in
Yeah.
Back to the Future, there's all the clocks and the inventions and the guitar thing.
Yep.
It's because the what's his name, the uncle or whatever he was, the professor was an inventor, right? And of course, it's funny and they kind of don't work.
Yep.
And so
Kind of
they
like Gremlins too, with the father and Gremlins.
so that's all right. He was selling goofy stuff.
Yeah, that no one and never worked either.
Now I think Yeah, Gremlins was after Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, I think.
Yeah.
Back to the Future was before it. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the script was in '88.
Mhm.
But it was, I think it was more along that line. But the point that he was an inventor, of course. I mean, all the main scenes are the same. So
That's
it's,
what I was going to ask. How much was, stay true to your original vision with Stuart? Sounds like a decent amount.
Well, there was a couple things that there were. One thing that they added, one thing they put a sequence where all the inventions don't work.
Yeah.
And then he goes to his science, and he's shrinking things so that they can be shipped to outer space or whatever. All that stuff is the same. What was different was when he looks for the kids, he had that where he's hanging and
so he can't touch the grass.
Yeah, that was something new.
That's cool.
Added. And I thought that was very good because that's very visual. Then when we had but all the main things, the Cheerios and all these things were the same. And the ant at first, there was a big crisis when Stuart and I decided that the ant should die. And Disney was freaked out. They didn't want the ant.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they ended up killing the ant. But what we did at one point we had the father go back to the scientific convention at the end.
Yeah.
And everybody's been laughing at him, and then out comes the giant ant, which is the setup for Honey, I Blew Up the Kids. So so that was a fun thing. They did add the Thanksgiving with the big turkey. I didn't care for that. I didn't think that.
I don't really remember that.
But
when I was a kid, I went to Disney a few times, and they had the attraction there.
Yeah, that was another thing when we
was cool.
Negotiating the contract. I kept trying to get some money from a theme park ride, because at that time Disney was looking for theme park rides, and I said, "This is a given. But they just wouldn't do it."
Yeah, I mean, I remember going there once or probably twice. And I thought it was a great idea back as a kid. I mean, it's like you're in the movie with the force perspective. Everything's bigger.
I shot a pilot for a Tarzan TV show in the Disney MGM studio tour in Orlando.
Oh, nice.
And we were part of the show. Like where we shot, we had to aim it. There'd be a big window, and people would be going by on these bleachers while we're working and shooting this Tarzan movie. And then we got to shoot anywhere at Epcot or Universal or the MGM tour. And at lunch, we would go out of the studio, and you'd be in the middle of the Disney MGM studio tour. So you're right in the middle of the park, because we'd go get a bite to eat. And just walking right out, there would be actual props that were built for the movie in Mexico that they used as part of the ride.
That's really cool. I mean, that was such a big hit, that movie. I mean, I don't remember how it was at the box office because I was young.
It was huge. It was huge. It was the biggest thing Disney had. Yeah,
that's what I thought, because that was everywhere. I mean, they played it on TV all the time. Like
people still love that movie.
Yeah. It's a classic, and I liked the sequel too. I don't know if it had more than one, but Honey, I Blew Up the Kids. That was all right.
Well, the sequel, I didn't have anything to do with Honey, I Blew Up the Kids.
Yeah,
but
I figured that.
But then they did a TV sequel, and then they did a little TV series. I don't think they ever captured again the sort of
magic of the first.
It's really, I think it's very tricky.
That's something with dogs too.
That was the thing when we were developing it. The whole point was that the kids get thrown out in the backyard and the adventure is getting home.
Yeah.
That's the adventure, getting across your backyard home.
Yeah.
But then when we were getting script notes and everything, Disney kept wanting us to go to a mall.
Of course.
And go, you know, and you're kind of, because they're going, kids go to malls. They love malls, you know.
Not when they're shrunken.
In this movie, the point is that your backyard is a wondrous place.
Yeah, and it's a familiar place, and and getting to your home, the most familiar place, but you're in such a predicament that everything seems threatening. It's
one
a
of the things
great
that
idea.
really was amazing to me was that when we first started it, Stuart and I had been, we both have kids, and we were at my house here in the backyard. We were having a cookout, and Stuart said, "Hey, you know, we should make a movie for our kids." And
that's how it came about?
Yeah, and then I said, well, you know, when I was a kid, I used to play with my little toys in the grass, and it seems so dynamic. It seems so fantastical, the roots of the trees. And I always imagined riding on a beetle or riding on a bee, you know. And so then we developed the script around, we said, oh, there's got to be water danger and this day, you know.
I mean, and once the idea comes up and you had that core idea, I'm sure it came easy a lot.
Yeah, well, Stuart's the one that when I first said, yeah, I had this idea, you know, being really little and all this, and Stuart said, oh yeah, the father's a scientist, and he shrinks the kids and throw them in the backyard. And so there's it just kind of rolled over. It just kind of rolled along. And I think that you know, when I saw the McDonald's cups with the bee on it, I went, wow,
I remember that.
Wow, that was my idea, and I'd never had the experience. It's something that, I mean, with Reanimator, I have the experience that 40 years later, you're talking to me about it. People are watching it. We're putting out an edition. So you go, Reanimator is sort of part of the cultural thing. And I've been able to experience that, which is a great thing. But I've never had the level of a McDonald's cup. You know? I mean, I imagine what George Lucas feels like, right?
Right, with all the merchandise galore.
Or whoever invented the Smurfs, or, you know, there's all these things.
The Simpsons, you know, any of those types of things. It's wild.
The thing about Warlock 2,
I was just going to say that before we get to decide.
For a while, I kept wondering why people kept bringing me Warlock 2 DVDs to see. I go, no, that's not me. And then this is how, I guess I have a bad memory. Maybe I'm demented or something, but actually it was years ago. And I went, why does everybody do this? And so I watched the beginning of the movie, and I was credited as the executive producer.
Yeah, I know you didn't direct.
And then I went, oh, now I remember when I was, before when Trimark got the rights to Return of the Living Dead 3, I had been trying to make Return of the Living Dead 3, or two friends of mine, two producers, Denitza Miner and Joel Castleberg, thought they had the rights and we're trying to set it up. And then it turned out they didn't. And their agent something was skewed. And then at that time, I was going to direct Warlock 2 for Trimark. And so I was working on the script. So we were developing the script. And then the head of the company came and says, hey, listen, I got Return of the Living Dead 3. Would you rather do that? And I said, yeah, that's a horror movie, you know? And so I moved over to that. And I guess because of my contributions to the script, I got that credit. I did get paid. It's not like I did it for nothing.
No, yeah. I knew you didn't direct it. I knew it was some type of producer thing, something related.
But I did eventually do a movie with Julian Sands, which was one of the Fantastic Factory movies. It was called Roma Santa.
I don't think I saw that one.
Is it called Roma Santa, the Werewolf Hunt, or Roma Santa, the Werewolf Trials, based on a true serial killer in the 1800s in Spain named Roma Santa,
Okay.
who, when he was caught, claimed that he was suffering from lycanthropy, and so wasn't guilty because he was. It's sort of like the insanity thing.
Yeah, except I'm a werewolf this time.
So I actually wanted to make a movie of that story because I'd read a newspaper article about it in Galicia, and so what we did, the company hired a novelist to write a novel about Roma Santa based on the reality. And then we had the rights to the movies for the novel. And then we made the movie based on that.
Interesting.
And
I got to watch that one. I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it doesn't quite, it's really beautiful movie.
Cinematography wise,
it's like takes place in the 1800s.
That's how Dagon is.
I developed a lot of the scenes. And actually, I had hired Chuck Perrello to direct it. And Chuck Perrello directed Ed Gein.
Okay, yeah, great movie.
And I brought him out to LA, to Barcelona. I lived in Barcelona for about 7 years doing these movies. But then he bailed. And I was developing the script with the writers, and he just couldn't handle being in Spain, because there wasn't anybody there that really spoke English,
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
so
depending on who you are, that could be
time. I used to in Barcelona. I used to have to get mostly get English-speaking actors from England. Because to them, flying to Barcelona, it's like us going down to Mexico for the weekend.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going across the ocean and everything.
But when you bring an American from LA out to Barcelona, they kind of go, "Oh, I don't know." And this is before you had Google, this is before you had Google Translate or even smartphones.
Yeah.
We're talking 1999, and so it was. So it was much easier, but since Chuck didn't do it, then another director came to do it, and I feel like they made it it's a beautiful movie, but I think it's a little bit, I think it's a little too artistic, if I may put it that way. I would have liked it to be a little more exploitative, although a few of the main scenes that I designed for it worked and still are in there, and they work real well. The funny thing about Roma Santa is that he was a laborer, and he started killing people to make soap out of their fat. Because soap was traditionally made from animal fat, human fat.
Yeah.
And
that guy had a hobby.
Well, he got connected to a bunch of sisters, and he started going through them one by one.
Really?
And so I had a scene where he had made the soap out of one sister, and he's in the bathtub with the other sister using the soap of her sister.
I'm sold now. I'm completely sold.
And that was Elsa Pataki. So Elsa Pataki was the star sister, and Julian Sands was Roma Santa, the bad guy. And so he would go crazy running like a wolf in the middle of the night. This is history, And then when he went to trial, the funny thing is that a lycanthropy expert from France came and testified in his defense.
Wow.
And the upper classes, the royalty, all supported him. The clergy supported him because, you know, if you're a Catholic, you believe in demons.
It makes sense.
Catholics, you know, it's magic is there. You believe in evil, and werewolves is just another kind of version of the devil. And the people who were against it, who were against Roma Santa and wanted him to wanted to be executed, were just the regular people, just the population who knew he was just a bad guy. And so they had the whole trial, which I thought was very interesting. And then he ended up dying in prison, and he would dressed as a woman. So sort of Norman Batesy there.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
serial killer.
I know Jeffrey Dahmer got murdered in prison also.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a beautiful movie. It doesn't quite, you know, it wasn't what I would have done with Chuck Perello.
But Larry here says it's on Roku. He says it's on Roku in the chat.
Hey, maybe it is, because Lionsgate has that one too.
Oh, it's another one they got.
Lionsgate, well, their rights are running out soon. Lionsgate, I made Faust, Love of the Damned, based on Tim Vigil comic. I don't know if you know Faust.
No, that's the one I did not.
That one. This is Faust.
I know the original play. Okay. Yeah,
it's a superhero.
I have not seen your movie though. The movie you did.
Yeah, here's the German DVD. You know, they have like a little book with it. You know, so you can see.
That's cool.
It has Andrew. I'm Screaming Mad George doing the effects. Jeffrey Combs is in it.
Right.
Andrew Divoff plays the bad guy.
Love Andrew Divoff. I had him on last year. Andrew was I had Andrew on last year. He was great.
It's Love of the Damned, baby. You know? Awesome. Now the comic book is this is the book that Tim Vigil has out now with a lot of the Faust. I don't know how many of the comics, you know, but it's very violent, and it's kind of pornographic sexually.
It's never a good thing. Well, no, I can't say never.
Yeah.
That looks cool, actually. And if I recall right, I've never been a big manga fan or anime or anything, but weren't you the first person to bring a manga to live adaptation?
I did two of them. I did the Guyver.
That's what
the Guyver is the first manga that was adapted into an English, like a Western, like a Hollywood movie. And there's the poster of it for Japan.
Oh wow.
It's got the Japanese writing. And here's a kind of a merch thing with I don't know if this still works. Yeah. So this is the merch. This is the Guyver's mask, you know.
Yeah. It's been for a while since I've seen that, but that is iconic, that mask. And Screaming Mad George directed that.
Screaming Mad George and Steve Wang, both of them incredible special effects artists.
Yeah, that leads great into Society and just the long-term collaboration you had with him.
Yeah. Well, the Guyver was really cool because it was based on a manga. It's the Bio Booster Armor. So we made up these to try to sell the movies to a studio. We put a kid in there. And what we did is we made it so if you turned this, you would see what they turn into.
Okay. It's like kind of like I forget what's the name? It's like a code cipher. It's like a cipher.
Michael Berryman.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Kid Dynamite. We have David Gale.
Nice.
And we have Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill plays the lead.
Yeah, that's right. And Larry's
And
asking,
so that's what
how
they
did he
say.
get
They're
involved?
turn into zonoids, you know. And so this is like The Guyver. I think it's not a great movie. It's funny. I thought I was going to get rich on it.
Yeah.
Because I thought that that's when Ninja Turtles was huge.
Yeah. Well,
and we thought, man,
one
this
thing,
is going to be
one thing I respect about you, that just talking with you here and interviews I've seen in the past, you're the type of person, you're always creating. You always have an idea. You always have something. Let's try this. Let's try this. Like you just said, let's try that. Let's try a theme park attraction for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You're always trying something new. And I think that's one of the most important things.
So I would recommend, well, we just put out the 4K Guyver, which you can get.
Oh, cool. Okay.
You can get from Unearthed Films. That's the, I don't know if you can see that. So that's the 4K of the Guyver. I don't know if you can see the monsters you get the glare, in there. But you can see how good these are guys in suits, and then they do kung fu. So this is
that's right.
This is martial arts in monster suits, and then there's a giant one at the end. And I'm gonna have a spoiler here. You get to see Mark Hamill, who plays the detective, turn into a giant insect, like a praying mantis.
That's great.
It's pretty cool if you ever think. Hamill got involved because he took the part. We offered it to him, and he took it.
Oh, he took it. I mean, it seems like he loves doing stuff like that. He did the Joker voice, the Joker.
Well, you just don't know about these movies. What's going to come out of left? Who would have thought? Do you think Mark Hamill thought Star Wars was going to become the biggest movie of our era?
Yep.
Absolutely. You don't know. You don't know. Thing. You have no idea. You've got with movies, you know, something. Look at, you're wearing a Terrifier t-shirt.
Yep.
That movie costs
insane.
Cost nothing.
Right? Isn't it crazy what they did?
The last one made $75 million.
It's unbelievable.
Okay, I'm not going to say it's on the level of Star Wars or something.
No, yeah, but
you just
of course.
Know.
No,
you just don't know. Yeah.
That's one thing I used to ask early on, a few years back when I started doing the channel and interviews. Did you ever see it? But then you know, the answer is no for everybody. No, I never saw this movie or these things taking off like that because you never can. No, it's just something that happens right time, right place, talent.
You don't try.
Exactly.
You know, and that reminds me that I should be encouraging your extensive audience to please order the Reanimator 4K.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to send me links afterwards and like email me with some links to the website, all that, I'll put it in there.
Ignite Films. Let me see if you know what? I might have.
I can put it all in the description of the video. So people after when they watch in the future, it's all the website links, all that's in there.
Yeah, it's Eagle Rock Pictures and Ignite Films. Where is that? They had a kind of a code that you could click on.
Do you have it, Larry? The set he's talking about? Larry said it's a great set.
I don't know where those are, unfortunately.
I've been debating. I mean, honestly, with Reanimator, you're really the whole heart and soul of it because you kept, even without the first film. I mean, you started the first film, you put everything up for it, you created it, you got it going, but then you continued that with Bride of Reanimator.
Well, that was my way. That was my way to get a chance to direct.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
Society was like a tube deal.
I had been trying to, I was trying to make Dagon, and then Stuart backed out. He said he's going to. At that time, I was in legal conflict with Empire, and so I bailed on. I was producing RoboJocks.
Okay,
and so that's what we were working on. Then I said, well, I can't be, I need to step aside because I'm in lawsuit. And so then I got a deal to produce Dagon, which Stuart was going to direct. And originally Jeffrey and Barbara and Bruce were all going to be in it. And so then I got the money in Wales, but then Stuart was sticking with the other movie, the Robot Jock. So then I started working with Dan O'Bannon on a movie called The Men, about a woman that discovers all men are aliens, which worked back then.
Yeah.
Today with the fluid gender, I don't think it's going to work. Yeah. But back then it was really fun. It was Dan O'Bannon.
Which means for me, it's probably still fun today.
It's still, I think you could still do it, especially now when things are kind of turning around. You know, it's not getting so,
absolutely,
so extreme. But it was again, really great. It's a real paranoid thing. It was so much fun. I worked with Dan for almost a year on it, and when I finally got the money to do it from this company called October Films, all of a sudden he was going to direct.
Oh, then
originally he was going to write, I was going to produce, and Stuart was going to direct. But very early on, because it was Dan's idea, it was his project. Okay. And then Dan said, "Hey, man, I want to direct it." Because he had just done The Resurrected. I don't know if you've seen The Resurrected. It's a Lovecraft movie.
Yes, I've seen that.
And then he backed out, and I thought, God, I'm losing this project. I'm going to go ahead and direct, be a one-stop shop, and of course, anybody who's worked on a set, at one point you go, I'd like to direct. Because the director, everybody treats him like every decision he makes is wonderful. What color should the wall be? Red.
Yeah.
They make
the calls. Yeah.
And then the director gets all the credit. But of course, Dad, you get all the credit too.
Well, that was something I wondered was, did you always want to maybe be director? Because you were talking about, having a camera as a kid, or did that come as the years went on? Did that?
I directed a short film. When I got a guy who knew how to make a movie, when I had my Bolex camera, I said, well, listen, I wrote a script based on a story a friend of mine had written. Okay. I said, now I know the director calls action. This is how stupid I was. This is this is pre-YouTube, okay? You want to learn something, you go to a book that's 30 years old.
Yep.
And I said, I know the director says action, but what does the producer do? And my friend said, well, you see, the producer is the boss, and he makes the most money. And I said, well, sounds like the job I want to have. I've always liked being the boss. Yeah. And I always want to make the most money.
Perfect fit.
Of course, then you start finding. Of course, I was an actor.
Then you
see
what
I was doing.
Yeah.
And
you see
how it is. Until I went out to Hollywood, then I learned from professionals. Today you don't need any professionals to make a movie. You can just need your iPhone.
Yeah.
But back then you had to get professionals, and in LA back then, and now in a lot of different places, you have these crews for independent movies. They know what they're doing, They do it day in and day out. And so I learned by by watching and hiring people. And then after I'd produced 3 movies or however, a Reanimator, Dolls, and From Beyond, and then I was developing, and then I thought, I want to try directing, and so then how am I? And so a friend of mine had a company where it's financed by Japanese, and they were making a bunch of very low budget movies, and genre stuff. And so I went to him and I said, listen, I've got I can make the Reanimator sequel, write a Reanimator. Now, I'll let you finance it and distribute it, but it has to be a 2-picture. But I have to direct, produce. I have to be totally in charge, and then, direct. But I want to make a 2-picture deal. 2 movies, not one. Bride of Reanimator and another movie to be decided on, but the other movie comes first. And the reason for that is that a French distributor once told me that he said, you know, we always say that a first-time director usually makes 2 movies in one, his first and his last.
Yeah.
Easy to get a first movie going, really hard to do another
to get a second.
And
I mean,
so
again, smart.
I thought, well, if the movie's no good,
At least you
if
got.
I make a movie directing and I totally fall on my face, I'll get another chance.
Yeah.
Because they'll still do Bride of Reanimator.
Yeah, and
So
plus that was a built-in audience a bit.
So somebody walked up to me with the script of Society, and I read it, and I thought, wow, this has the same kind of weird paranoia as The Men. I've been living with that for a year, that paranoia, and that script had it. The one thing it didn't have was a fantastic element. It was a blood cult. And I said, you know, I said, I'm not going to do. I've got to have effects. I've got to have.
Wasn't it a traditional like slasher originally, like more of a slasher
kind of,
film?
Yeah. I mean, it's very offbeat. Because, but
it's just your style too.
But everybody's the same at the end. But all the paranoia and all that stuff was there, and it was in Beverly Hills because the main writer, Woody Keith was his name then. Now his name is Seth Daniel. That was basically his story.
Didn't he also write One of the Silent Night, Deadly Nights?
Yeah. Well, after Bride of Reanimator, we did Society, and then Bride of Reanimator was the next one.
Yeah. And
I was working with before that, before I ever did Society. Stuart got this high-end, big representation, big agency to represent him because he was like a theater director and everything. And at one point he said, we were talking about Bride of Reanimator. There were many different ideas about it. And he said, well, my agent says I don't do sequels. Okay. So then I was working with Stuart and Dennis and William Norris basically Stuart and Dennis to write a script for Bride of Reanimator. We had this whole idea about West and Kane working kind of with aliases at a mortuary. And then I got the go-ahead. This was like in February of 1980. I guess it would have been 89 or something.
Yeah, because Society was
89. Yeah, and I think I was in post on Society. Yeah, I was finishing post. Maybe I just finished post on Society, but we were getting the script going, and I got the money from the Japanese money came through, and then but they said that the movie, the one condition was it had to start shooting by the first or second week in June of that year, which was about
6 months,
5 months ahead.
Yeah,
and so but you don't question that. It's some tax thing, who knows what. It's Japanese, right? And so I told Stuart that we needed to get it, we had to do that. He says, no, we can't do it. It's going to take longer to get the script done. And I said, well, I've got 4 kids. I got to make the movie. I need a payday.
Yeah.
So I just paid off the work that was being done, and then went to Woody Keith and Rick Fry, who had written Society, and Screaming Mad George, and I said, let's just start from let's just do a whole new thing. Let's come up with another idea. And the only thing that survived from the previous treatment was the one thing that I just really wanted to have in the movie, which was that I couldn't let go of, and that was
so great hearing all of this.
The finger eye creature.
Oh yeah, that's great.
This is a merch from Middle of Beyond. I don't know if you know that company. They do great stuff.
I don't collect a lot of stuff anymore nowadays, but NECA I know, and some other ones. But that looks cool.
But anyway, so that creature stayed. That was my favorite thing to do. And we just started, and by God, we got a script done by the first version of the script was printed out on May 1st, which is when we opened our pre-production offices, and we had 5 weeks before we were going to shoot. So we just went boom, 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 So the movie kind of, you can tell that a little by it. It's uneven. Certainly,
I think
nowhere near as fulsome as the first one. But it's got a whole. I wanted to be more operatic, and I wanted to do all these creatures, and so it falters, which is something. It has some good moments, and the bride is really great.
Yeah, and of course a huge homage to Bride of Frankenstein, the Reanimator, Bride of Reanimator. I think that was something in like.
And I tried to use,
if you knew there was a sequel.
Yeah, I tried to use all the elements that I could from the 6 stories of Herbert West Reanimator that Lovecraft wrote to try to use up those ideas. The idea of the Hill's head coming in a box. Of course, he didn't have bat wings. That was the scariest thing to do. I thought, boy, I'm going to get crucified. I'm going to be in movie jail. Genre movie jail for doing that.
Well, that's one thing though.
How do you get the head around,
I mean, the head giving head scene in the original.
Well, then the first one, that's a whole
famous. That's one famous scene though. Was there a reason Barbara didn't come back for Beyond? She was dead. They didn't want to bring her.
Well, we did have the opening of her right when the last one ended, her coming back to life, and she turned it down. She didn't accept the role. I don't know why. I think maybe it wasn't big enough, because it would just be the beginning. But on the other hand, at first Jeffrey wasn't going to do it.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I started casting for Herbert West. I didn't have a choice, but luckily Jeffrey came around. The only one who really wanted to do it. Now, Bruce Abbott was always on board.
Bruce Abbott.
And then David Gale actually called me up. He called me up and I said, hi, Dave. He says, I hear you're doing a sequel. I said, yeah. And he said, what's in it for me? Which is it's a cliche. That's what actors always ask.
Yeah.
What role do I play? They always say, what's in it for me? And I said, God, David, I remember your body exploded.
Yeah.
And your head got squished
and thrown against the wall. Yeah.
I said, I don't know.
Great effect, by the way.
He said, I've got some ideas. This was right when Barbara had turned me down and Jeffrey had turned me down.
Okay, so it's like, let me hear him.
And so I was going, hey, at least he wants to do it.
Yeah.
And so we went that night. Went with Woody and Rick. We just started. I said, okay, we got to have Dr. Hill here. So he'll just be ahead. And how's he going to get around? And is he going to walk on his hands? It seems kind of goofy. And I thought about the bat wings, and I went, "Oh, I'm going to be crucified for this."
There's got to be a lot of stuff
I don't know.
There's got to be a fine line with you when you're writing stuff.
It's very tricky
because you have such a wild style, and you're moving in such crazy stuff, big on effects, but a lot of heart in them, and a lot of commentary, social commentary in them, especially.
Well, you also
a lot of that.
You got to figure that it's the tone of the movie that makes people feel comfortable, and if it's consistent. And I think the greatest thing about Reanimator is that Stuart made that movie seem like a real world. That world of that movie was consistent.
Yeah.
And I think the style of it was live theater, because that Stuart had been directing live theater for 10, 12 years. And he tells stories on stage. Now, if you go to theater, there's a suspension of disbelief. It doesn't look like the real world, for one thing. It's not like film where you can go to real locations. And
and editing and post, all that makes it look like a real world.
In theater, the audience, you have to accept this world, and then you want it to be consistent and successful within its aesthetic and its style of. So, for example, when we were originally, the original pilot didn't have the Hill head in it, didn't have Dr. Hill. And so when I read the stories, I said, hey man, there's this guy carrying his head around. I always remember, I was always a fan in the 50s of the talking head movies, The Brain That Wouldn't Die.
The Brain That Wouldn't Die.
And Vincent Price carrying the
Eyes
head
Without a Face.
House on Haunted Hill. And
yeah.
I love that stuff. And even the Tom Savini effects on Day of the Dead and stuff. The head gets cut off, rolls.
Day of the Dead is my
that
favorite.
Kind of stuff is just fun.
That's my favorite Romero film.
And so then when we were trying to develop, I said we got to have Dr. Hill. And in the stories, Dr. Hill is a pilot, and it's during World War I. He crashes and gets thrown out of his plane, and his neck gets severed, and his head flies into this cauldron that West and Dan are working on, which is what I call the reanimator goop. Because in the stories, it's the serum, then they get this iguana shit and make a goop where things can just grow together. You don't have to make it so delicate. It can somehow become organic within itself. So the head falls in there, and now the head's alive, and we have all the scenes with Dr. Hill. He made in the stories, he has a kind of like a wax, like the house, like wax museum type face, and he carries his head around, and he leads. By the end, he leads this army of ghouls. So we made him a doctor, and that's why, for example, the opening of Reanimator, I shot the opening with Meg, the special effect with Meg dying again. Her head just twists around with another actress. But then I had so many openings, because I also wanted to make a joke out of when Wes says, who will believe a talking head get a job in a sideshow? So I thought, let's put him in a sideshow. We'll put him in a sideshow. And then I wanted to have the war, have West and Dan go down to Peru. I put it in Peru so that a MASH tent has all kinds of people dying all the time. Lots that you can do with your syringe on that. And so eventually I had too many openings. I had too many prologues. And so I figured, get rid of the one, that with Megan, because I don't have Barbara anyway. But we did shoot it, And then I got to do what I always wanted to do, which was do the William Castle gag, where he has the ghostly head come out into the screen and talk to the audience, like in Behind the Hill, and they come right out and talk to you, the ghost. So I thought, no, I'm going to have Dr. Hill's head come out. My only regret is that it couldn't be in 3D, so it could just hover over the audience. And
was that ever an idea?
And talk to the audience, and so that's what we did.
That would have been cool. Was that ever an idea, though?
To do with 3D? You bastard!
That was pretty good. That's a pretty good impression there. Was that ever an idea to do like a Reanimator in 3D?
No, this was that movie. Oh, well, I would do 3D. I did one movie in 3D. It's called Amphibious. It's about a
Amphibious
giant
3D,
sea
yeah.
scorpion that I shot in Jakarta. You know,
Mm.
in Indonesia, you know, after I was in Spain, I went to Indonesia to try to do a bunch of movies there.
Okay.
But then
Indonesia makes some great horror movies the last decade or so. Indonesia's been putting out a lot of stuff.
I did a couple. I did a couple movies in Indonesia, and one with these brothers, the Mo brothers, they made some pretty good movies. They were all Indonesian language. Well, some of them were in English, but the big sea scorpion thing I made out there, you know, and it was in 3D. And this is before the cameras got real versatile. It's right when it was starting, you know, right when it was restarting, you know, when I think the first 3D one that was the My Bloody Valentine. Was that the one, My Bloody Valentine?
Yeah, the remake in 3D?
It was in 3D. So remember there was a thing right around
remake.
2007, 8, 9. They 3D, you know, we're doing 3D again. And of course, the beauty of it is that once you have digital shooting, 3D is really possible. And you can do it you don't even need to, I don't want to get into a whole 3D thing, but I have all my own ideas. I did some interesting things with 3D, but I really like 3D. And I would, I mean, now with the super faster frame rates and if you go to like, you know, I go to the Chinese IMAX, it's a real IMAX, and they make it so sharp and so there's so much resolution that it's almost like 3D, you know.
Yeah.
The difference is you don't play with the spatiality of it. Yeah. And I like doing that. But yeah, if I could, I would have had that head come right out.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
And talk to them, you know.
I mean, it's never too late. Who knows if there's ever another Reanimator, but that's something only you know the answer.
We keep trying.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. But so we got to talk the shunting scene quick, and then I don't want to take up too much of your time. This has been a blast talking with you. How did that come about? That scene, the shunting scene, the shunting scene in society.
I tried to think. Well, we were working on the script, and I thought I want to have effects. I want to have something. This was a time. This was during the time of Nightmare on Elm Street and The Thing and these Rob Bottin and these guys were really doing crazy stuff with all these different plastics. Yep. I used to think that somebody should write a book called Invasion of the Rubber Guys. You know, how the special effects guys took over, you know, the genre.
Oh yeah,
because this was the most fun, and they and so you'd go to each new Friday the 13th movie to see how weird it would get, what they're going to do now.
Yeah, how are the kills going to be?
And that's when I first saw. That's when I first saw Screaming Mad George's stuff. It was in the Roach Motel episode.
The Roach.
And
great effect.
And the reason I got up with Screaming Mad George is that, well, I'd already decided that we got to have something at the end. It can't be just like a blood thing.
Yeah, big event.
And then I thought, well, what special effect have I not seen that I'd like to see? And so I thought, I'd like to see flesh melding into each other. And so that was the beginning.
Okay.
And then it was coming up with a reason for that. How can you get that done? And then I think it was, we started thinking of a whole group, you know, this whole orgy of it. And I think it was Woody Keith who called it the shunting. And then early on in the development of that, the society was financed by Japanese companies, and they said, "Look at there's a Japanese effects artist named Screaming Mad George in LA. If you could use him, it would help us in Japan.
Okay,
he's known in Japan." And so I went to meet him, And it turns out he's this big surrealist painter, and I'm a huge. I mean, I've always been a fan of surrealism and expressionism.
Same here.
And so we just started looking at Dali paintings and started picking out parts of Dali paintings to incorporate. And then George would come to the story meetings late at night after I get my kids to sleep. I'd do the story meetings from, I don't know, from 11 to 2 or something. And and Woody Keith and Rick Fry had come over, and then Screaming Mad George. And so, you know, we'd talk about it and develop it, and George would draw, and then George made maquettes. And then I kind of came up with a whole logic for the whole thing, because I wanted it, you know, I thought, hey, this is my chance not to do a werewolf or a zombie or
something completely
different.
This
is a new monster. This is a new monster.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So that was
I don't think there's been a monster like it since.
No,
honestly.
It's funny.
Really.
It was not accepted very well when it came out.
No, I can imagine.
Well, I think
it came out the year after I was born. I was born in '88, so it came out in '89.
This was the era of Ronald Reagan, you know, Reaganism. Yeah. And this was greed is good. And this and I think there was this idea that, well, you know, in the United States, you just work hard, you're going to make a lot of money. There is no class system.
Yeah.
And but in the UK, it was a big hit. It was treated really respectfully. They flew Billy Warlock out there.
He's great.
You know, it was a real movie. Yeah. And also in France, Spain, Italy.
So it did better overseas.
But here, even my friends Stuart liked it, but even my friends were kind of like, you know, oh, that was really good. You know, you know, the faint praise that damns you the most, that. But it turns out that, but then, you know, Beyond Re Animator and Society came out about the same time. Society never did anything. We gave it a very small release, and then it was, you know, it didn't really. The company that got the rights of the Medusa films in UK released it in the UK to great success, but they were so hyped on it, they bought the US rights. Oh. Well, they didn't have any kind of organization here.
They had no distribution.
So it just sort of got thrown out on video and didn't get any push. And you know, it is, I mean, arguably, yes, it is. I can't say the directing is all that good, especially of the actors. I know there's a lot of unevenness. There's a lot of empty spaces there, and
but that's the campiness,
clumsy stuff.
Yeah, but there's charm. There's so much charm.
I think it helped a lot by much later. It got a new generation audience.
Yeah,
and that was great. And especially what's great about it is that the new generation audience just look at it like a 80s VHS era.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's the 80s. It was wacky back then.
It reminds me of when I would watch J-horror with my friends.
Yeah.
And actually the guy who that I produced, that I produced Necronomicon and Crime Freeman, which is a nice big genre, a big manga movie I did, which never released here for really stupid reasons. It's based on Crime Freeman, which is an anime, and it's a martial arts movie. But this guy Take Ichise created J-horror. He did. Okay. He produced, The Ring, The Dark Water, The Grudge.
All classic.
And he also co-produced all the English language versions.
Yeah, the remakes.
And so when I would watch the J-horror with my friends, I'd usually had a girl with hair hanging down in front of her eyes.
That's the thing. It's so different, the culture there, that the horror and stuff.
And so there'd be some illogical things.
Oh
in the
yeah.
movie,
You ever see
right? And
House
I
in
would tell my friend, I'd
77?
say, that's stupid. Why would they do that? And he'd
Yeah.
say, it's the culture. It's
Yeah.
Japanese, you know? And I'd say, are you sure it's not just wrong, not good? And
Yeah.
that's kind of the benefit I get now for society,
Yeah.
is that now people look back at the 80s in society and people go, God, that's kind of dorky. And he says, oh, it was the 80s.
See,
So
I mean,
see, I get
I
the
get that.
benefit now.
I
Now
get
it's
that.
beyond criticism.
Yeah.
Nobody can criticize the legitimate crap
Yeah.
that's
It was the time
because
period.
it's old.
But honestly, I mean, I don't look at it that way because maybe it's just because I was always big into practical effects. And when I watch, because I just watched it last weekend, and as I told you, I was having a little marathon of rewatching some of your movies, and of course, I had to pick Society. It's my favorite film of yours that you directed, and every this rewatch every time I see it, and that shunting scene starts, no distraction, no phone in the hand.
Well,
No, no, my eyes are glued to the
I would
screen.
say from the time he comes home for the shunting
Yeah,
until the end, it
it's batshit.
absolutely works, except for a couple moments, but I'm not going to say which ones. And there's some effects that, boy, I wish I could do it to George Lucas and go and fix them a little digitally.
It's not the butt. Is it the
Especially
butthead?
when the mother's walking on the hands, you know,
You
without
know,
arms.
I like that though because
It's,
you could see the sockets in her eyes, right? Because you know it's the prosthetic, but it adds to the
yeah.
creepiness. It adds to the surrealness.
But you can't beat the butthead, you know.
Yeah, the butthead's
That's
great.
memorable. That's memorable.
Yeah, and that's I think one of the things because nobody's ever seen a bunch of, and in the film they explain it. They're not aliens; they're just another species, right? Of human that's always been here, and they've sucked off the lower class.
They're literal. They're literal
They're
blue
little,
lights.
yeah, exactly. And I don't think anyone has ever seen anything like that, or will never see anything like that again. Where there is a big orgy of people skins meshing together, hands coming out of the guy's mouth, just insanity. And I really kudos for just that movie and that whole scene in general because I think.
Well, listen, JT, I've got to run, but this
yeah,
was
absolutely,
fun. So
absolutely.
let's do
This
it
is a
again
blast.
sometimes. And thank all your audience for hanging in there with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brian.
And hey,
chat, thanks for hanging out.
Please get this special Reanimator 4K deal. Comes with its own book. Comes with a book. You know,
cool art.
It's got art. It's got extras. It's got a you get some cards. You get some kind of lobby card type things, and you get all the different versions of Reanimator, and you'll get a Dr. Hill bobblehead.
That's freaking cool. So guys, know that. Is there a link? Is there a link for you can send me after this?
I don't have the link, but it's Ignite Films, or go to Eagle Rock Pictures.
Okay.
And you order direct from them. It's direct to consumer.
I'll put it in the description.
And then if you go to Unearthed Films, you can get the Guyver.
Okay. Cool.
And so
that's one I definitely
go
online,
want to go on YouTube or whatever and look up the look at the trailer for the Guyver.
Yeah, I'm gonna put those links in the description after this.
Get it for your kids anyway. This is some fun. This is some fun kung fu alien monsters, and Mark Hamill turning into a giant insect. Yeah. What do you want?
And you got Screaming Mad George directing, so I mean it's all talent involved. But everybody in chat, thanks, Larry, Rocky, everybody. Thank you again, Brian. If you want to just stay for a second when I end it, I'll thank you again. Sure. And everybody else, we have Felipe Mora on Wednesday and Amy Donald from Megan, both on Wednesday, like a few hours apart. So we got a double bill then. But until then, everyone have a good night. This was the great Brian Yuzna, everybody.